Politics in America, the country where I was born, has taken a dark turn.
The American dream is dead.
2016 saw the rise of a new president who promised to restore America to its former glory. Less than a year after Trump's election, white nationalists marched in the streets of an American city, believing that their moment had finally arrived.
You will not replace us!
Where did this openly racist, xenophobic, misogynist politics come from? For years, what came to be known as the alt-right had festered on obscure online message boards, where anonymous young white men, resentful of their diminished status in Obama's America, seethed with hatred for women, minorities, immigrants, and the oblivious mainstream, derisively known to them as normies. I spent years exploring these murky corners of the internet and watched as these young men organized themselves into a countercultural force. When Trump emerged, this army of online trolls ventured forth from the sewers in which they dwelt and reached for the very pinnacle of American political power. And they would soon hail his victory.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
Hey everybody, I'm Harris O'Malley, and this is Paging Dr. Nerdlove. This is a series focusing on specific dating and relationship issues. Lately, it really seems as though you can't turn on the news or go on social media without hearing about sexual harassment or sexual assault, unwanted gropings, or just some dude sliding into women's DMs with a fresh crop of pics that nobody actually asked for. And of course, whenever any woman says, hey guys, maybe please... I came into the pickup artist community the way that a lot of people did. I had no idea how to interact with women. I didn't know how to get dates. I didn't know how to flirt. I want to kiss you so badly. It was kind of a revelation typing How to Get Good with Girls into Google and finding The Game by Neil Strauss.
You don't have to castrate yourself around beautiful women. It's not too late to start over. Check out the phone rules on my blog. Call up a woman.
Pickup artist is someone who goes out and tries to go home with as many women as possible.
We live in paradise. There are women everywhere. All you have to do is snag them.
People who use a very methodical system of trying to get women interested in sleeping with them.
When we talk about DHVs, demonstrations of higher value, what exactly is that value? It's S&R, survival and replication.
It was very much about like tricking women into being interested in you by making them insecure, by making them feel that they need to be protected, or that you could tap into some kind of biological urge they have to be with somebody who projects strength and so on.
There were some pickup artists who said, if a woman is making out with you and won't go any further, you have to undo your fly and just like pull your out and put her hand on it and just say, look what you've done to me. I dove into it with the passion of the newly converted. And I was really starting to turn into this toxic person.
Check, check.
They were selling, at the core, this kind of super cynical, adversarial view of relationships between, men and women, that it's all like a zero-sum game. If you don't take action, if you're not aggressive and pushy, you're screwed. You come away thinking, reading enough of these sites, that women can never be trusted. And sex is this power dynamic.
If you look at the top guys, the top guys in pickup who are just crazy successful with young, hot girls, they're not afraid to put that girl in her place.
In these communities, there's a very strong anti-feminist ideology that runs through them.
Women were never meant to have power, nor were they ever designed for power. It's just not how nature set us up.
Certain bloggers would start to get popular that would really reinforce this as well.
I don't think women need to be educated above reading and writing. She only needs enough education to have children, and that's it.
When I look at these communities and I think about the effect reading these manosphere sites had on me, it makes me think that these ideologies are some kind of form of advanced psychological abuse. The incel community It stands for involuntarily celibate. They're, I guess, men who are celibate against their will. And they have developed over time into an extremist reaction and result to these PUA manosphere ideologies. They have sort of gathered in their own spaces and have become this giant echo chamber, telling each other they're horrible and telling each other society's horrible.
For the last 8 years of my life, ever since I've hit puberty, I've been forced to endure an existence of loneliness, rejection, and unfulfilled desires. All because girls have never been attracted to me. I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB, and I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut.
The problem with Elliot Rodger was never the sex, it was the hate.
If I can't have you, girls, I will destroy you.
He directed his hatred and his rage at women for cruelly denying him what he believed was his by right. Within the incel community, there would be people who would say it's the start of the beta uprising, when all of the incels would go out and they would take their revenge on the society that had wronged them.
Like, that was one idea that the PUAs came up with. They would define, you're either an alpha male or a beta male. Like, alphas get to have sex and betas don't.
Being a beta male was definitely a big theme on 4chan for many years. This idea that there were kind of dominant males who were sexually experienced and successful with women and so on. And then there were these kind of smart but geeky kind of beta males who were on places like 4chan.
What started as just a Wild West anime fan website and has kind of become a playground for all manner of extremists and nerd culture generally, where a lot of alt-right views formulated because it's people anonymously talking to each other, sharing things they find funny, sharing memes they find funny, often because they're offensive or transgressive.
Those sorts of communities end up being these cesspools where a lot of racist and anti-Semitic speech flourishes because they're just trying to outdo one another to prove how much they can trigger the liberals or how offensive they can be.
There really was a far-right kind of fascistic core to the politics that was emerging from places like 4chan.
There is a very definite connection between the incels, people in the pickup scene, and then the alt-right. The people in the pickup scene, they're coming in, they're feeling like there is this thing that they should have in their life, but they don't, and they are being told over and over again, well, you've been cheated. And here's why. It's because feminism, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. They just wind them up and say, you should be in this world, you should be this top dog, but you're not.
The message the far right would present to a community like involuntary celibate young men would be, there's a reason you feel this way. There's a reason you've been left out of the sexual economy, and that's feminism. Women have become judgmental, and they're not sort of taking their natural role in society, and that's why you're not having sex, because of these political movements.
There's this feeling that society had sort of rejected you, but there's also this sort of feeling of like solidarity, like we're all a bunch of rejects, we're all a bunch of rejects together. I just think to take these, young men who are confused and you instill this super cynical, adversarial ideology into them, and this is what happens. They end up retreating into these toxic communities.
Gamergate was really a kind of anti-political correctness movement. It did involve a campaign of abuse against feminist gamers, writing and expressing different kind of critiques of games.
In the gaming world, there has long been brewing, it's very obvious in retrospect, sort of culture war. And the culture wars hadn't really come to video games in the way that they did with Gamergate.
Gaming was a male thing, and women who were coming into them had to be willing to put up with really toxic harassment.
The starting moment of Gamergate can be marked to the middle of August of 2014, when a guy who was really upset about his game developer girlfriend, a woman named Zoe Quinn, decided to write a lengthy screed online about what a terrible girlfriend she was. One of the allegations that the ex-boyfriend made was that she had been involved with other people while they were dating, one of whom was a reporter who had been freelancing for Kotaku. This manifesto began this moment of people online deciding to pick apart the life of Zoe Quinn, the life of people close to her. This was what defined a lot of what people came to describe as Gamergate.
So I dated this guy on and off again, mostly off again, for about 5 months. I finally completely got away from him because the relationship was pretty abusive. A couple weeks passed, and then suddenly my phone started exploding with a lot of disgusting things about my genitals and how much of a slut I was. Within that first month, people were talking about putting dead animals in my mailbox, coordinating on how to beat me in a way that wouldn't leave me with brain damage so that I could still be afraid of them. They eventually hacked my blog, which was hooked into my Twitter, and put up my home address and phone number, my dad's home address and phone number. It was horrifying.
One of the biggest groups that really had an issue with Zoe Quinn was an image board called WizardChan, which got its name from this weird idea that if you're still a virgin at 30, you become a wizard. She created a game called Depression Quest, all about dealing with mental illness. To WizardChan, she had no right to talk about being depressed because she's a woman. What does she have to be depressed about? She can have sex whenever she wants. They were very much the people who were saying, this woman is a witch, we must excise her from the community, we must punish her for her lies. And the whole thing just spiraled.
The importance of Gamergate is it showed that a relatively niche community could weaponize social media and effectively shift the narratives in certain ways.
I had found the IRC rooms where they were coordinating a lot of this and just have been silently watching for weeks. People would split off and be like, okay, these people are in charge of trying to isolate her so she kills herself. These people are in charge of making sure she's too toxic to ever work with. It was so wild, and they would workshop these things with each other.
It's questionable if Gamergate would have had the potency that it had in a pre-Twitter era. Twitter has been able to help people organize and rally and speak up against the powerful. But Twitter also functions as an excellent outrage mechanism for people who decide that their voice isn't being heard, and what they're going to do is go after the people who they think aren't hearing them.
One of the reasons people didn't really see the alt-right coming, I think, was that there was for years beforehand this idea of trolling and this idea that it's all irony, it's all playful. That was the most clever thing they did because it allowed them to actually kind of hide their politics. The original idea of trolling was that it was about making fun of someone, trying to annoy someone, trying to get a rise out of someone online.
They started off as an amoral, do it for the lulz. So if you're a conservative Christian man, then they're gonna send you a butt plug because isn't that funny, right? And they're gonna make gay pornography photoshops of you because, well, isn't it funny you're a Christian conservative gay man? And then they would go after women too just because they didn't care. They just wanted to inflict pain. The internet's hate machine, so to speak.
What's motivated a lot of people who've come through Gamergate is political concerns, not concerns really about video games, but concerns about culture, concerns about a sense of the push that they're feeling from people on the left about diversity, about opportunity for marginalized voices. And these are people saying, well, no, we're white men, or we are worried for white men that they're being marginalized. And so we're standing up for them.
One by one, the feminist campaigners around whom the Gamergate controversy centers are having more and more questions raised about their reputations. And that's not as a result of some sort of intrusive...
Hey, it's Mike from DangerandPlay.com, and a lot of people want to know why I'm involved in Gamergate when I don't even play video games.
Gamergate saw the rise to prominence of various alt-right figures like Milo Yiannopoulos, Mike Cernovich, others who were sort of around in these culture wars before, but saw in Gamergate, I think, an opportunity to get a level of affirmation and online support that they maybe hadn't seen before.
It's about cover-ups, about cover-up in the courts, about people abusing the court process.
Mike Cernovich started out as a manosphere and legal blogger who was part of this online community dedicated to purveying this narrative that women are always trying to screw over men.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're back. Mike Cernovich, Cernovich.com.
Mike Cernovich involved himself when one of my abusive ex's friends decided to tag him in once I got a restraining order. Yeah, someone wrote this thing. He tried to involve himself in the paperwork, advised my ex on the 2 years of court battles that followed, threatening anybody. Oh yeah, talking about weird conspiracies and threatening to sue me for something. Like, I'm still not even sure what. Also, he thinks I killed somebody.
My name, my home address, my description, along with the LAPD's phone number was posted on the internet. Zoe Quinn retweets it. Nobody calls that harassment though, because on their privilege hierarchy, I'm at the very top, right? White, cis, heterosexual, straight male, right? That's perfectly fine and dandy to do to me. If you want to have impact on culture, you have to become a celebrity. You have to create a brand. You have to create a personal brand. It's just
in the de-anonymized internet in particular, the way that we use social media is about self-branding. What you do is associated with your name. I think at the same time that you had these, let's say, reactionary kind of subcultures emerging on 4chan and places like that, you also had a culture that was of the cultural left, which was about gender fluidity and kind of taking the cultural gains of the left to the next stage. These kind of online environments, you could say, of the left were both kind of ultra-sensitive and incredibly cruel and inclined towards sort of quite mob-like behavior. People needed to show that they were virtuous.
When you're scrolling through a Twitter feed, there's this kind of mutually reinforcing cycle of wanting to say things that get validation from the people that you admire and also wanting to validate the people that you admire.
You could go from just being a random teenager in your bedroom to being, you know, someone with a big online following. And all you had to do is castigate the right people and express the right kind of correct, virtuous positions on everything.
The whole point is to display your activism and penchant for public performance of one's political piety.
The idea of helping people to identify privilege as compared to others in a way that it might otherwise be invisible is crucially important to intersectionality and helping people to support each other's movement. But it has definitely gotten to a point where privilege is being treated as gambling chips. So if I'm Black and a woman, that means I have less privilege than a white man and therefore can not only be authoritative toward them, but if a Black gay woman comes, suddenly I cede the floor entirely to her. And if a Black gay disabled woman comes, then that's the person who has, the most credibility.
But the problem is that if everyone's doing that, then the whole thing loses value, because you're not going to particularly stand out for doing it. People had to constantly raise the bar to be allowed into these kind of virtuous communities.
You take so much space.
Exactly.
You listen.
You want to silence all our voices?
Are you trying to silence us right now? Is that what you're trying to do?
A couple of years after that culture started to emerge online, it did start to move into the world of college campuses. Even the terminology that became common in online spaces about safe spaces and microaggressions and trigger warnings and things like that started to become part of campus activist culture. The bar, again, was so high, you couldn't really gain entry into the world of acceptable thought on campuses unless you ticked a lot of boxes. Anyone who wasn't quite fitting in could be kicked out.
There's a certain sensitivity about what can and cannot be said. But the response to when people transgress, right, when you say the thing that's not politically correct, then there can be a really harsh backlash all across the internet.
Oh my, the SJWs. Oh my God, I respect the hell out of the SJWs. Everything I know, I learned from the SJWs.
No, I don't agree with that.
Then why the did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I
the
have
hired you?
A social justice warrior, or an SJW, is a progressive who is shrill and obsessive and who won't stop judging you for what you say.
We are not speaking on terms of white privilege. This is not a discussion. You have lost that one.
I am talking about.
In the far-right imagination, SJWs are the root of all evil.
They form their little hate mobs, and if you look at it morally, it's kind of mean what they do, but I learned from them.
There's a social incentive to engage in group trolling. You're showing not only your own position within your group, but defining who's outside.
There are some people who, I don't know if they're naive or they're just ambitious, but they always think, I will be the person who the mob doesn't turn on for some arbitrary, stupid reason. I will not make a mistake. That person was only punished because they did something to deserve it. I'm good. I will follow all the rules. It's like, honey, there's no escape in the mob.
It's under the Obama presidency that we've seen the displacement of a political economy from left politics and the privileging of a performative approach to politics. The Obama presidency marked the triumph of a sort of left identitarian neoliberalism.
The Democratic Party, for a long time, ever since third-way Democrats decided to align themselves more with corporate interests and get away from labor interests, have relied on identity as a way to kind of hold on to their progressive bona fides. By having a certain amount of diversity at the top and advocating for diversity in corporate environments, Democrats could appear to be better than the Republican alternative. And that's all it takes in a two-party system. It's a lot easier, and it also doesn't challenge the status quo at all.
The population that they want to herd into identity categories are disproportionately working people. Most black people and most Latinos are concerned about their jobs. Race, discourse displaces considerations of a political economy, and thus the possibilities of a serious class solidarity.
The consequence of that has been that it has made people who are alienated economically and alienated in other ways, even though they're white and or male, they've been made to feel like they don't have any place in the national conversation about what it means to suffer or hurt.
Let's say you're like 16 years old, right? You live in some suburb and you're white and male and middle class, but your prospects are low. You got two internets to choose from. One internet says you're congenitally racist. You have already participated in rape culture by consuming the dominant media. You have offended someone 10 times by speaking in a common language that you would use with any person on the street. And then you have this other internet that is full of rebellious kind of comedy. you are, in fact, encouraged to indulge maybe some of your most forbidden interests. And you're 16. You're experimenting with doing things and saying things that are offensive. You're trying to find that line. Which internet are you going to choose?
When Trump arrived on the scene, a lot of the far-right internet was ecstatic because here was a guy who wasn't politically correct. Political correctness and social justice warriorism are the real enemies of this movement.
Those movements loved him because he was un-PC, because their view was always that if people are allowed to speak freely, then they will express their un-PC views.
I think Islam hates us.
The reason they decided Trump was their God Emperor, as some of them did, is Trump just smashed through all those boundaries. These are exactly the sorts of messages you would see in communities like 4chan, and the reason people said them is because they weren't supposed to.
/Poll is a section of 4chan, and /The Donald is a subsection of Reddit that was focused on organizing supporters of Donald Trump. The defining characteristic of /Poll and then later the Donald is not so much a set of ideologies or a policy agenda, it is transgression. And when Donald Trump emerged, there was a sense, not just in what he advocated for, like, we're gonna stop Mexican immigration in this country, the way he did it, that this slashing, insulting way that he did it.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
I mean, Donald Trump is many things, and one of them is a magnificent internet troll. I mean, he is an expert at trafficking and outrage and committing outrage and being outraged himself.
You're gonna have more World Trade Centers. It's gonna get worse and worse, folks. We can be politically correct and we can be stupid, but it's gonna get worse and worse.
It made a lot of sense online because that's more the lingua franca, constantly insulting and doing things like that. There is like I think any social network, a like-mindedness where things can kind of go off the rails into extremism. The only way that their kind of campaign was possible, a campaign that was raising less money than traditional campaigns, that was not supported by everyone in the Republican Party, that was being out-organized in traditional methods by the Democrats, they were throwing a lot of Hail Marys to new forms of social media. They were paying attention to a very dark section of the internet and then mainstreaming it for a giant political campaign.
In 2016, to get Trump elected, we ran huge get out the vote campaign called MAGA 3X. We got to the point where actual Trump surrogates were mentioning MAGA 3X in their speeches, which we thought was amazing at the time. It was like, wow, look at that.
The first thing a skillful political entrepreneur does is find new seams, new ore of political discontent, and then they mine that. Steve Bannon first noticed the presence of these kind of very passionate online communities, which overlapped with the white nationalist movement and overlapped with the men's rights movement. He saw Donald Trump as as they put it, the piece of political horseflesh that he would ride.
Steve Bannon knows how this stuff works and has long been in contact with figures like Milo Yiannopoulos. I mean, he employed Milo Yiannopoulos, and he does understand how online hate works and how quickly and effectively it can spread.
This is not conservatism as we have known it. This is not republicanism as we have known it. These are racist ideas, race-baiting ideas, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-women, all key tenets making up the emerging racist ideology known as the alt-right.
The Clinton speech about the alt-right, from everything we know, was actually motivated by disgust Hillary Clinton had herself for this sort of politics. But that speech saying this has no place in our politics was exactly what alt-right wanted to hear. They want, above all else, to be noticed. They want to feel like their transgression is really getting inside the heads and scaring or irritating the people that they're targeting. There's an attitude that I think is attractive, especially if you're a loser online. You're involved with this cause that's so powerful it will overthrow the rest of the government. But as far as the people who run the country are concerned, you're just still a loser online.
I like the idea of Trump at least because he is a gigantic middle finger at an establishment that has failed.
Transsexualism is, is a psychiatric disorder.
Social justice left, the fat, ugly, quivering Lena Dunham left. You know,
Yeah,
the
that's a new
nose-piercing,
thing, right?
blue hair stuff. Well, these are the people running.
In early 2017, as part of a larger college campus tour, Milo went to the University of California at Berkeley, and before his speech could happen, there was a large protest. In that protest, a smaller contingent of individuals engaged in a violent riot.
This was a real galvanizing moment for the far right because they could then spread the narrative that the left wouldn't let them speak and wouldn't let one of their heroes speak. And I think it had a pretty net negative impact on the progressive movement.
Not only did Milo gain a larger pedestal because of this riot, it turned Berkeley into kind of a focal point of the identity and culture wars of 2017.
So I was evacuated by my security detail and by the police tonight from UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley, of course, being the home of the free speech movement. It's both ironic and sad that this
It made it look like, you know, Milo had a point, basically, that he was saying, all we want is free speech and look what happens.
What I honestly believe is that Milo does not have an actual ideology whatsoever. I believe that he thought that the white nationalist side was advantageous at that time, and so he jumped towards that and fully embraced it.
Some of the folks that got into violent street battles with the left in the subsequent months after the Milo riot were actually white nationalists. They saw what happened with Milo, how much attention he received and how many followers he gained from his canceled speech.
It was a really surprisingly eclectic mix of people that had only known each other from the internet, from forums like 4chan, and had organized online these trolling groups essentially, and it was just brawling.
By showing up and dressing in these video game style costumes and getting in actual fistfights with leftists, they knew that they would gain more attention. People would videotape them, put them online, and they could become instant online celebrities.
For the alt-right, it was also fodder for memes for the internet, which is kind of how they communicate their politics. We were witnessing this movement of online trolls become an actual physical militant movement.
Your city has become symbolic for the tearing down of the symbols of the history of this nation.
Charlottesville was this moment where the playfulness and irony that had been there was gone. Far from mere transgressive or trolling memes, this was a movement setting out to achieve ethnic cleansing.
We are people who have for too long cowered and scared of the idea of being called racist, but this no longer affects us. And because
The whole culture of 4chan and the online culture of the alt-right was all about anonymity. And now here, in this moment that redefined the alt-right, people were marching publicly without masks at the risk of revealing their identities.
you will not replace us. You're gonna have to get used to the alt-right. You're gonna have to get used to white identity. You're gonna have to get used to uncut young men who are willing to stand for our future.
The next day, things got violent. They had clashes with Antifa.
You had one protester on the left being killed. There was no euphemism to hide behind. There was no banner about free speech. This was a rally to support white supremacy. It made everything crystal clear for people who were watching those events.
Richard Spencer and his little Nazi boys, they're just a marginal, fringe, kooky attention whore movement. And like, oh my God, big media coverage. What, 20, 30 dopey guys in khakis and white shirt went out with the tiki torch? I think that they all look pretty lame and pathetic, right? That's all you can bring, bro?
For generations, it has been the countercultures of the left that have assumed the posture of anti-establishment rebellion against the hectoring moralism of the conservative right. Today, those roles have been reversed. It is now the left that is the gatekeeper of conventional morality and the alt-right the agent of subversion. This time, that subversion is in the service of racial tribalism. Lurking behind all of these online backlash subcultures, from the Manosphere to Gamergate, there was an older, more serious and more earnest far-right movement, ready to exploit a new generation of alienated youth. I wanted to see the people behind the alt-right phenomenon for myself and speak to one of the movement's most visible thought leaders, Richard Spencer.
We are at a new point in our movement, the last stand of explicit white identity, and the fact that we are all meeting here is an expression of that. Trump did not choose the alt-right as his chief ideologues. Trump actually should have listened to us, and he should have literally hired us. We could have given him ideas that are infinitely more popular and better than Paul Ryan's ideas, period.
Right-wing movements that could benefit from greater membership and from recruiting young men have realized they have a big pool of recruits in these communities full of angry and sad and disillusioned young men.
Really own these issues of anti-corporate.
Once they were able to sell these men on this idea that they're getting screwed over by society, they were able to add in the racial stuff. Say, this is another way. You're not only are you being screwed because you're beta male, but you're getting screwed over because you're white. I think that became the connection.
If our side somehow can't find a way to talk meaningfully and honestly people out there who are hurting all over this country, then there are much more sinister and dangerous forces out there that have internally consistent seeming explanations to offer them. And that's what's happened.
I mean, just whatever. So the pool of people that's next is going to be those white Bernie voters.
Yes. You know, the Bernie left was a very wide movement.
Yeah.
And I mean, almost completely. They were attacked for being too white by the mainstream, neo-corporate liberal establishment Hillary people.
2018 is going to be the year the left is joining. This movement is going to have to be explicitly anti-capitalist in a lot of ways. And I am someone who is a libertarian.
It's plain to see what an atomized and conflicted society my generation has inherited. It feels like a desert of meaning, with which neither the left nor the right can be satisfied. A society without nation and without religion, but also without collective purpose or class solidarity. Into that void, the alt-right has emerged to provide a kind of kinship and collective identity to those who are adrift. It is an identity that can find its ultimate political expression only in some kind of race war.
The alt-right is a contemporary movement in the sense of it's people who are lost in this simulated reality, who are trying to find meaning.
But I mean, why does meaning have to only be kind of genetic inheritance or even cultural inheritance? If you cannot change your genetic inheritance, then, I mean, in a way, why is it even a political question?
Human nature is racial at some level, but one can't ever really escape it. I think we need to understand it and embrace it.
Your ideas about how you would change things, I think, can only involve genocide and can only involve war and violence on a massive scale. The idea that people would voluntarily leave and that white people themselves would not oppose you violently.
I mean, there are many examples of population movements that have not been consensual. I would be willing to do almost anything. I mean, in the sense of, could we pay people to return to their homeland? Could we colonize places near the United States and create homelands or ethnostates for people? I would be willing to do all of these things in order to achieve the ultimate security and the ultimate flourishing of the white race.
I just think that your movement is allowing, it's sort of saying, actually, white people are the real victims, and if only they could raise their consciousness, then they could fight back. But what is there to fight back against? You're not being attacked.
We are being displaced. We do have this rooted history that stretches back to both halves of the Roman Empire and stretches to the ancient worlds. I love this difference. I mean, I think we have an amazing diversity in the real sense of that word.
Why can't we go one step further and transcend the white aspect?
Because the whiteness does seem to be this fundamental fault line of the world. We can transcend that to a degree. But in the sense of peoples having a deep-rooted history and a destiny, I don't think we can get beyond race.
What if it came down to either your vision never happening or having to have that violent confrontation?
The existence of my people is not negotiable.
But what if they don't want to go along with your movement?
We'll force them to be free.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have a contingency that's arisen. I have to interrupt for now.
What happened?
We have to go chat.
Okay.
Very serious.
Very serious. Okay, hold on.
They're about to throw us out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why? Just because for the obvious reason?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're saying they don't appreciate that it was booked under Praxis. It wasn't totally revealing.
Let's tell them we want a full refund or we won't leave.
Sure, we can do that. Okay.
And then we can all go meet up at a restaurant in Old Town. I think that's what we should do.
Exit.
Yeah. But let's be real assholes.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Right.
You might have to leave. We are being expelled from the facility as I speak. This is where we are right now. We're getting deplatformed from social media. We're getting physically deplatformed as well.
By now, the alt-right's political project should be clear: to annihilate the democratic vision of a pluralist America. Perhaps it's time for something new, something other than the endless culture wars and the politics of identity. Time to stop chasing the countercultures and instead look to the normies.